Here's what's happening right now. Today's focus is Bill Clinton's Spock's calls on DOJ to release Epstein files referencing the former president. This story matters because it affects real people, real decisions, and what happens next. In this video, we'll walk through what happened, why it's happening now, why it matters, and what to watch going forward. Let's start with what we know. What happened? According to reporting by Politico, a spokesperson for Bill Clinton publicly called on the U.S. Department of Justice to release any files connected to Jeffrey Epstein that reference the former president. This request came after the Justice Department released an initial batch of documents related to Epstein, but stopped short of publishing the full archive in its possession. The newly released material prompted renewed scrutiny over what remains sealed, what legal standards govern disclosure, and whether additional names or references could emerge. The spokesperson's statement framed the request as a transparency issue, emphasizing that full disclosure would help clarify facts and reduce speculation. The call was notable not only because it came from Clinton's camp, but because it publicly challenged the DOJ to go further than it already has. At this stage, no new allegations were made in the statement itself. Instead, the development centers on access to information, what the government holds, what it has chosen to release, and what remains confidential. That distinction is important. This is not just a headline about one individual. It is about how sensitive investigative records are handled and who decides when the public has a right to see them. Why this is happening now. Events like this rarely occur in isolation. They build over time. In this case, pressure has been accumulating for years around Epstein-related records. Civil litigation, congressional inquiries, media investigations, and public distrust following Epstein's 2019 death all contributed to ongoing demands for transparency. What makes now different is timing. First, the DOJ's recent partial release reset expectations. Once some documents were made public, attention immediately shifted to what wasn't included. Partial disclosure often creates more pressure than silence because it highlights the existence of additional material. Second, the political environment has changed. Public confidence in institutions is fragile, and demands for transparency, especially involving elite figures, carry more weight than they did even a decade ago. Third, reputational risk is front-loaded. From a strategic standpoint, asking for disclosure early can be seen as an attempt to shape the narrative before new leaks, court rulings, or investigative reporting forces the issue. In short, the conditions that once allowed this issue to remain dormant no longer exist. Delay has become harder to justify, and silence carries its own cost. How the system works, DOJ, records and disclosure. To understand what happens next, it helps to understand how DOJ records work. Investigative files often contain a mix of verified evidence, unsubstantiated leads, witness statements, and sensitive personal data. Federal law requires the DOJ to balance transparency with privacy rights, due process, and the integrity of ongoing or closed cases. Some materials can be released through court orders, Freedom of Information Act requests, or prosecutorial discretion. Others remain sealed indefinitely, especially if they involve third parties who are never charged, minors, or sensitive investigative techniques. This means the DOJ's decision is not simply political, It is legal, procedural, and reputational. Releasing more files could clarify facts, but it could also expose the department to legal challenges if disclosures are deemed improper. That tension is at the heart of the current moment. Why this matters: human and institutional impact. For individuals directly named or referenced in Epstein-related materials, the consequences can be immediate. Even indirect association can lead to reputational harm, professional fallout, and long-term public scrutiny, regardless of legal culpability. For institutions, the stakes are different but equally high. The DOJ faces a credibility test. Releasing too little risks? Accusations of shielding powerful figures. Releasing too much risks, violating legal norms and privacy protections. Media organizations and political actors are also watching closely. What happens here may influence how future high-profile investigations are handled, especially those involving wealthy or politically connected individuals. At a broader level, this story taps into public expectations about accountability. When trust in institutions is low, transparency becomes not just a policy choice, but a legitimacy issue. Expert perspectives and risk scenarios. Legal experts tend to evaluate situations like this along 3 dimensions: legal authority, precedent, and fallout. One scenario is stabilization. The DOJ may release a limited additional set of documents, enough to demonstrate transparency without opening the full archive. Public attention could then gradually subside. A second scenario involves escalation. Continued pressure through courts, Congress, or investigative reporting could force broader disclosure over time, keeping the issue alive for months or years. A third scenario is fragmentation. Different courts, agencies, or jurisdictions could release information unevenly, creating confusion rather than clarity and prolonging speculation. Historically, experts note that partial transparency often increases, not reduces, public demand for more information. That is the risk officials are weighing now. What happens next? In the short term, attention will focus on the DOJ's response, or lack of one. Silence, clarification, or further disclosure each send different signals. In the medium term, court actions, FOIA litigation, or congressional involvement could determine whether additional records become public. Long term, this episode may shape how sensitive investigative materials involving high-profile figures are handled in the future. If transparency thresholds shift here, they may not shift back. Now, brief takeaway. This topic matters because it reflects deeper tensions between transparency, privacy, and institutional trust. The most important thing to watch is not speculation, but action. When authorities move from review to release or from silence to explanation, that signals a change in risk assessment. That's your Now Brief. If this helped you understand what's happening and why it matters, like the video and share it with someone who should see it. Subscribe to stay informed. I'll see you next time.